Good afternoon, Catholics. Sorry, I'm trying to embody my Adrian Cronauer. And for those of you who are way too young to know who that is, if you haven't watched Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams, you're missing out on a essential piece of American pop culture. So I'll leave that there for y'all. Everybody else may get the reference. I know Ed does. He actually went to school with Adrian Cronauer.
No. I was in school long before him.
Long, you graduated as he was going in.
I was out in the real world by then.
Got it. Okay, fine. That's how you want to be. Yesterday was normally supposed to be a day where I tried my best to be productive, and it completely failed. And I found myself thinking, you know what I could do? I could go to confession, but then, of course, couldn't do that because we only have confession on Wednesdays and Saturdays. So I might end up going tomorrow night. And I have to say, I don't know what it would be like to have a parish nearby that I could go to that had just pretty much confession 24/7, because that's one of the things I would love to see, like a return to when you watch some of these movies, even if they're not Catholic movies. If someone goes into a Catholic church, you've got the priest who's living in the rectory, his little apartment that's, just off to the side or behind the altar somewhere or upstairs in a little loft area. And then he just happens to always notice someone walking in to go sit in a pew, or, it's that whole mental image you get of what it's like inside a Catholic church. Obviously, we don't have that. Obviously, the reality is very different in, I would say, most parishes. There may be a couple out there. I think the Church of Saint Sulpice in Paris still kind of has that set up where they've got religious sisters that are living in the little convent just off to the side. And then you have the priest living in the rectory inside the church there as well. It's just kind of a cool vibe. I would like to see a return to that. If we could start building churches that had the rectory included in the building rather than just the utilitarian, well, this is the church building, and then over here we've got the school, and then over here we've got a library, and then over here we have the parish house, which is like the offices for the parish, and over here we've got this. It'd be cool to have, the priest living in the church. He wouldn't have to go very far. He wouldn't have to commute. I think our priests live, I want to say 3 miles away from the church. So it's not really that big of a deal. It's a nice property too. We went out to a dinner there a few months back, me and my wife, my kids, and some other people that had come into the church this past year. And awesome property. I'm glad because it's big enough to house the seminarians, the priests, and even host dinners for 30, 50 people. So it's kind of nice. But yesterday I saw this young lady. I'm going to assume it's a young lady. It was an anonymous account, but the way that they spoke kind of reminded me of a young lady. She was going to confession, and she waited in line forever. And then she was next, and the priest just got up and walked away because they have to begin mass. I get it. I've seen that happen. I've been standing there in line for confession, and we have 2 lines for confession because we've got 2 priests usually. During the summer, it's kind of hit or miss because our priests take their 30-day annual leave back to back with each other during the summer, because we have a summer schedule where, okay, there's not going to be a mass on Mondays, and there's only going to be 1 mass on Thursdays, and the offices close early, It's summer, right? Something you could expect. But I've been sitting there in line waiting for confession, looking over going, "Man, I might jump over into that line. It's getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and this one seems to be taking a while." And they'll be down to like 2 people, and then as soon as I get ready to make my move, that priest disappears, and the 2 people have to come and get in the very back of the line, uh, that I'm in. It's because it's time for mass. Confession times on Saturdays are 3:30 to 5, and we have a 5 p.m. mass. So it's you got to get in there. But I've been in there and I play this little game in my head. Okay, this guy's going to be in and out pretty quick. I'm going to give him like a 3-minute. Well, I'm going to guess he's going to be like a 3-minute confessor. And then I look over and I see the little old lady who's been at the parish since 1812. And I'm like, she's going to run down everything she's done since 1815. And it's going to be a while. And I'm standing there in line. I've got nothing else to do. And I'm not going to be sitting there scrolling through my phone, you know, tweeting at the peeps. Although if the organist is going rather hard, I'll bring out the video and record it just because it's awesome and I want to share the beauty of that with people. But when it comes to confession, I've noticed that people are of 2 different mindsets. They want to go in there, they want to lay all of their burdens down, confess all their sins, receive some counsel from the priest, which is fine. But then they forget that there's 58 people in line behind them, and we have this finite window uh, for confession.
Mhm.
I've I've always been told, and when I say always, I would say for the last 2 years of, being Catholic and coming into the church and all this other, get in, say what you did, do the act of contrition, get your penance, and get out. Right? Now, my priest, Father Smith, he's probably one of the most straight-laced, I'm following the rubrics to the letter, and I will call out even visiting priests if they don't have their hands or fingers in the right position when they say or do or whatever, right? He's that guy. He kinda reminds me of those, when they're doing some kind of big banquet and you've got the catering team in there with rulers and they're making sure the napkins and the spoons are exactly 2.63 inches apart and all this other. He's very meticulous, right? And I appreciate that about him because I come into the Catholic Church for rigidity.
Mm.
I come into the Catholic Church for something that is not flexible, right? That's the whole point of tradition. That's the whole point of the rubric. That's the whole point of the liturgy. It's not supposed to be flexible. It's supposed to be, this is it. And if you're not doing it this way, you're wrong. Right. Now, obviously, there's some contention between TLM and Novus Ordo, but we're not going to get into that. But he's a very straight laced guy, especially when it comes to the sacraments. Nope. That baptism that my visiting priest friend did is not valid. I got to redo it right here on the spot because he didn't do the proper form. He's that guy. And I appreciate that. And something else I appreciate is prior to confession beginning, he stands up at the ambo and he turns on the microphone and he'll, he's probably the most loved priest uh, in the upstate, but he'll say, okay, folks, I'm really glad you're all here, getting ready to get your halos polished. But let's remember, we've got a lot of people in here. We've got a very limited amount of time to uh, give out the penance of the sacrament of penance. So remember, sins, not stories. If you do need to tell a story, you can make an appointment with me or with Father Tomlinson and sit down privately and we'll do it. But when it comes to confession, give me your sins, and we'll go from there. I don't need the justification of a story because that's exactly what it is. If you're trying to tell a story about how your sin happened, you're trying to provide context, and the context is irrelevant to receive the sacrament.
Mhm.
You're not stop. Don't try to justify it. Give me your sins, not your stories. If you want to tell me a story, we can do that when we don't have 300 people in line for confession. Right. And I believe it was Fulton Sheen who, God, I can't wait for that guy to get canonized. But I believe he had said, it doesn't matter if it's been 80 years since your last confession. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes.
Mhm.
Right. That's another thing. And we mention him a lot on this show is Father Larry Richards. He's like,
Mhm.
I don't care if it's been 80, 90 years since your confession, or if it's your first confession and you're 95 years old. I can have you in and out of the confessional in less than 60 seconds. He goes, because he's got this list. He'll go, all right, are you single or married? Because he's got two different lists of questions.
Mhm.
All right. Single? Okay. Have you? And he runs down the list. Yes or no to any of those? Yes, I have. Cool. And then he runs down another list. Have you? Yes or no to any of those? Yes. Okay. Are you truly sorry for your sins? Do you regret them? And will you strive to go forward in abstaining from these sins and repent? Yes. Okay. Do you know the act of contrition? Yes. Go ahead and say it. Blessed are we for the act of a good confession. I I absolve you in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Okay, next. That's it. In and out. And it's beautiful. How do you feel, Ed?
Hmm.
Because I'm of two different minds here. While one, yes, I need to get in there. I need to receive the sacrament. And I know even if I'm the last person in line, I have zero excuses for my sins. I have zero excuses in all I have done or that I have failed to do through my most grievous fault. Going to tell you what I did, confess them. I will say my act of contrition. I will receive absolution. I will receive my penance, and then I will go and do my penance. That's it. However, I do kind of like it when I have to wait longer for confession. And most people are going to go, why? Get in there, get it, and get out, right? It's what you're saying. I like that it's an inconvenience for me to have to go to confession. I like that I got to suffer a little bit temporally in order to receive absolution. It shouldn't be like a drive-through confession. It shouldn't be, uh, door dashing priests. It shouldn't be convenient. It should suck a little bit,
Mhm.
right? Because it's we use all of our senses in the mass. We can see, smell, hear, taste, touch. The confession, the sacrament of penance should not just be one dimensional. It shouldn't just be here where we're feeling it. And it shouldn't just be up here where we're thinking it. It should be everything. Because if I got to go in and I got to wait, man, this sucks. Well, Jeff, maybe you shouldn't have done that and you wouldn't have to be in here right now.
Hmm.
And so I like it when there's a little bit of suffering involved. And I don't mean I'm getting beaten by the old lady, who going over everything she did since she went to school with King Louis the Third. I'm not talking about that. But when I got to wait and it takes time out of my day where I could be doing something else and I could be already done and on my way and in a state of grace and feeling good with my halo as shiny as can be, it's good that I gotta work for it a little bit and stand there in line, uncomfortable, impatient, knee hurting because the concrete floor over there sucks and I don't have cartilage in this knee. It should suck a little bit. So I think the only way that the way it works in my mind is that we still, even though I want you to go in there, do your thing, get out, give sins, not stories. I need like 50 of you in front of me to do that. So I still have to wait because it shouldn't be fast and quick and done. Da, da, da. You should have to wait a little bit. And for the people who get there first, well, you just had to leave early. So that's yours. That's your suffering to get there. You had to race and possibly get a speeding ticket to get there. Right. So what are your thoughts on that, man? I mean, you've been going to confession way longer than I have. You've gone to way more than I have. Where are you at on that? The fast confession? You want to go in there and get some counsel? Or how about it just sucks having to wait, so you'd rather them get it over with?
Well, I will add one thing though. You're talking about having to wait when you get there, and there is another benefit to it other than that you're doing a little bit of extra penance basically through suffering. And that's that if you're using the time wisely and you're doing a further reflection and examination of your conscience, that, like, for me, when I wind up sitting there because there's 10, 15 people in front of me, by the time there's only 2 people left, all of a sudden it'll hit me, oh, I forgot about that time I did blank, So now I've added something else into the mix. And I feel good about that because then I feel really confident that because the other side of that is you're pretty close to the front line. You get in there, you think you have this great confession, you're just walking out the door, and you're like, oh man, I forgot 3 things, And what do? You
Get back
get
in
back in
line?
line, and you sinned again already. What's going on? But and the thing with it is, I mean, I've been going to confession for uh, 53 years now, so I have been to a few of them, and I've seen every kind of priest imaginable. Because I always often, even now, I still wonder about that. Like, what does the priest prefer? What does the church prefer I do? Because I've encountered those priests, like you mentioned, Father Larry Richards, who will say, "Did you do this, this, and this, and this?" It's a yes or no. Did you do this, this, and this? Yes or no. I've had priests who say, "Which commandments have you broken, and how many times have you broken them?" Mm-hmm. I've had priests who I think I've spelled out my sins pretty accurately and with a lot of detail, and had them ask me for more detail, So I wish there was a real good definitive answer to, well, I mean, maybe no one would ever say, well, what's the perfect confession? But at least give me a very strong template to follow, because to me, it seems like you have to get used to whatever priest it is that you wind up going to on a frequent basis, because a lot of them have very specific ways they would like you to present your sins. And that, to me, is an issue. But to me, I'm more of a get in there, confess, get out kind of a guy. Because here's my thought. If you've done an examination of conscience, you know what you've done wrong. You've really reflected upon it. You're promising to make the effort not to fall into the same traps and sins again. And you are physically going to confession. The priest is hearing from you that you are sorry for your sins, and he's going to grant absolution. So whether you hit all the marks, whether you miss something, you add something, you give a long confession, a short confession, you're going to receive absolution as long as the sincerity level is there. As long as you really honestly, you went there with the intent of confessing all your sins and asking for forgiveness. So to me, long or short, I don't know. I mean, I've been in the same. You kind of mentioned it. you get behind this old lady and you're thinking, okay, what could she have done between last Saturday when she was here and this Saturday when you know she didn't even leave her house? You know what I mean? What could you? And then she's in there for half an hour. You're
Like, yeah,
wondering
she was on my meal train route, and
exactly
so I
right.
know she hasn't left the house. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, and she's in a front. And then you see then you see this guy comes on in on his Harley. His face is all tatted up, and he's got, like kill them
It's
all
like
that
me.
God
I'm
sort him
covered
out.
down to my knuckles. I'm covered down to my
Exactly.
knuckles with freaking tattoos. I've got tattoos up the
What's
back of my neck. Got them all
now?
over my body. I go in there for
This was
confession.
no
I'm
reference.
out in 3
Yeah,
minutes. This cute little, Betty White looking grandma who might weigh 63 pounds, has never left her house in the last 2 weeks except to go to mass and confession. She's in there for 3 days, and the
yeah.
priest develops a drinking problem. Like, what has she done?
Yeah, that's the best part. You see the old lady come out after half an hour or whatever, and the priest comes out immediately after, and he's pale as a ghost. He's sweating, and he's like, "You guys got to give me a minute." I just, you know what I mean? And then so I don't. That's what I'm saying. So to me, it's not about the long or the short. If you tell your sins in detail, if you just give the highlights, it's all about the sincerity. It's all about the penance. It's all about seeking forgiveness, and of course, making a very sincere effort to avoid those same sins. That's
Right.
where I kept down on that.
Yeah. A really good friend of mine, him and his wife is friends with my wife, and he sits right behind me uh, during Mass. He was telling me the story because he came into the church this past Easter Vigil,
Mm.
and it was actually at RCIA that we met. But he was telling me he had made an appointment with our priest to go and talk to him to basically give his first confession and not go and stand in line and hog up the confessional. He booked a 30-minute appointment with our priest.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, I can give you 30 minutes. Come on in. So he got there, took him back to his office, and he laid out, 30 odd years worth of sins.
Mm.
And he was expecting something very deep and something very profound from our priest. And his only response was, is that it? Okay. And then he was done with his 30-minute appointment in like 5-6 minutes,
Yeah.
and I like that. Right.
I like that.
And I also like that. Um, our the other priest that we have, he's 75 years old. I love this man so much. He's awesome. He looks so like old curmudgeon type when you look at him, but then he turns out to be just the epitome of a lamb in the confessional, right?
Mm.
My first confession, I went to him, and he took the time to tell me a bit of a story after I had laid all my sins out and finished confessing. And that story really kind of hit the spot for me. It made me feel so much better. And this was before, I received absolution. I felt a billion times better. Got absolution, said the act of contrition, went and did my penance there in the pews. And I like that element too. Now, Father Smith, I kind of get the same thing from him, but it's never in as much detail as what this priest did. So I know there's a bit of a variation. I will say that I do agree with the premise that my priest talks about with if you're trying to tell the story and the circumstances of you committing sin, you're trying to make it seem like it ain't as bad as it is. You're
Exactly.
trying to add a little bit of context. Well, see, what had happened was like it doesn't matter what
Yeah.
happened or how it happened or why it happened.
Yeah.
Did it happen? Yes. Okay. I've received your confession. Right. And like I said, if you do need some time for some counsel with your priest, make an appointment.
Yeah.
right? Because this young lady that I'm referring to yesterday, she was upset that she got turned away from confession because they just ran out of time. Got up and walked away. And because the person that was in front of her was one of those old ladies that confessed everything she's done since the Stone Age. So I get it, right? And I get the frustration that I've seen people exhibit when, oh, they're next in line. They're next in line. And then the priest has to walk away to start mass because we've got a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right. So I get that. But it does make me really glad that I never felt the call to be a priest.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I never felt the call to be a priest, or even a minster when I was a dirty little Protestant. I never had, I never had, that pull and that calling. I did work for someone who was a mental health professional, and under all the little dotted T's and I's crossed with HIPAA laws and non-disclosure agreements and all this other, I had to handle some notes for a lot of his clients. And I kind of feel like it would have been very much the same as being a confessor with some, or, as being, a priest in the confessional in some of these instances where I would definitely have a drinking problem after listening to some of these things. It's like, whoa, this is wild. Like I needed to see a therapist that I was employed by for therapy because of his other therapy patients. It was rough. Okay. Very rough. So I do have to give some hats off to these priests that have literally heard everything.
Mm-hmm.
Probably by they're nervous and they're shocked probably within the first 30 days of being a priest. And then by the end of their first year, like they're made of leather. Like I've heard it all now. Unless their parish is exclusively little old ladies, and then it's much sooner they develop that calloused skin.
Yeah.
With those long, wild confessions. But yeah, I get it. There's differences out there, and some people will say, well, I want my priest to comfort me. Okay, I get it. But are we being selfish? Is that a thing, being selfish with the priest time when we go in there to give long, drawn out confessions and tell these stories because we want to feel better? And we know that there's long lines. Is that a thing? Is it being selfish? I don't want to say yes, it is, but I also don't want to say no, it isn't.
But that whole idea of like I want the priest to comfort me, that goes along what you were saying earlier about you tell a sin and say, but you want to give believe me, there was a backstory to why I sinned, which makes my sin a little less worse. And it's the same thing. If you want the priest to comfort you, that's kind of, I don't want to say it defeats the purpose of going to confession, but it takes some of the luster off of it because
it's like, bro, what's more comforting than being absolved?
Exactly, right. But anything outside of absolution that is meant to make you feel better about what you've done, or to make you feel not as bad about what that's kind of goes against the grain of confession. You should feel sorry for what you've done. You should feel guilt for what you've done. You should feel remorse for what you've done. That's the whole point of this, is that you need to feel that pain that you have caused yourself and caused God, in order that you turn that pain into a positive and use that as a reason to avoid those sins in the future, because you don't want to cause further pain to you or to Christ. So that's the beauty of that. So if you're looking for a priest to put his arm around you and say, come on, I've heard so much worse. That's nothing. Don't even. No, it doesn't matter. And sin sin is sin. There's not like it's not like there are sins that don't count, sins that don't make it to your permanent record. in school or something, you know. If
It's
you have
technically
sin,
not a sin because you were angry and you were provoked,
exactly, right?
and
Yeah,
that lady should not have called bingo first.
exactly. Sin is sin. And so
Yeah.
don't try to whitewash it. Don't try to minimize it. You're there in a confessional for a reason. So don't destroy that reason that you went in there for. You know, don't just take it like a man, even if you're a woman. You know, I mean,
Mm.
just take it. It's
Yeah, that reminds me of something that I heard today.
yeah,
Of all the things that people complain about and try to criticize the Catholic Church for,
yeah,
there's one thing that should make all of the super duper secular liberal feminists very happy.
yeah.
In the Catholic Church, there is zero gender pay gap amongst the clergy.
True. Very true.
Just saying, there's
There's a
no pay
caveat
gap
there,
amongst the
but
clergy. There's no pay gap amongst the clergy. I'm just
no.
saying. I'm just saying. There's no gender
Hmm.
pay gap.
Very
So
true.
take that, anti-Catholics. But no, like I said, I don't think I could. I don't think I could have ever been a priest or even a minister, or definitely not a therapist. Um, but it does make me kind of curious about the whole vocations thing. So I've talked to you before that my wife was like, "Oh, maybe you should try to become a permanent deacon. Become a part of the diaconate because it's a 6-year formation period."
Mm.
Like I get it, and it's not even really 6 years. Anybody that tells you, "Well, I'm in the 6-year formation for a deacon," don't they literally do like a class once a month, and they don't really do much but like a summer project over the summer. So it's more like 9 times a year they meet. It could probably be a little more in depth and be a 2-year formation period to be a little more rigorous. But it's 6 years, 1 weekend a month. It's the National Guard of uh, formation. Okay. Just say that there. But honestly, I think having a longer formation period is pretty important. Just the other day, I heard a story from a guy who was a seminarian and he was on his way to an ordination of someone else that he was in seminary with,
Mm.
and he met a girl.
Oh boy.
And yeah, and he met a girl. And he was like, "You know what? I don't think this being a priest thing is for me." Because he just straight up felt like, "Oh man, this one might be the one." Because it's a
Mm.
fair estimate to say that every single man in the seminary does want a wife and children, but they are willing to sacrifice that to answer God's call to priesthood.
Hmm.
Fair to say that that's probably the case with most of them, right? Well, this guy said, "Mm, she might be it.
Mm.
Maybe God's not calling me to the priesthood." And maybe he wasn't, right? Maybe because it was during his formation period. So, okay. He left the seminary, dated this girl. They did not get married.
Mm.
And then he met his current wife, who they've now got 3 kids,
Mm.
and he serves his church in other ways. But funny thing about that is the girl that he dated, that he did not marry, ended up dating and marrying another person from that same seminary.
Oh wow.
So it's like, wait, is the seminary a great place to meet chicks? Or
Apparently.
I mean, look, look, when I was in the army, there was always this group of chicks that would be like, "All right, we're gonna follow these vehicles when they leave post on Friday night to go party because we know where these GIs are gonna be. We can snag us a GI." Is it the same thing at the seminary?
I think it
It's like, well,
is.
this was this one just waiting, be like, "Oh, let's see when these when these guys working for their collar, come out, we'll see where they go. We'll meet them at the Waffle House, you
Mm.
know, and see. But the, like the call of vocations is awesome. I do feel like I have a vocation within the church outside of uh just me being a father and a husband
Sure.
and a parishioner. I don't know what that is. It's probably not, as being an ordained deacon. Most
Hmm.
definitely probably not that. Obviously, it's not going to be a priest because I'm not an Anglican now and I'm not crossing over. Uh, I don't know what it is, but have you ever considered any kind of vocations?
Me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Because look, you're Eastern, right? I mean, you're
yeah,
Byzantine,
yeah,
right? So you could be a married priest.
you could, as long as you're married before you enter seminary.
Right.
You can't,
Right.
yeah. But yeah. No, it's funny because, and I think I may have spoken about this the very first time I ever talked to you, maybe. But when I was a little kid, I used to hold mass in my back, or I used to hold divine liturgy in my backyard, and I'd set up the picnic table as an altar, and I'd put a towel around my back, um, and I would have, I don't know, my mom would supply me with something to use as the host and the wine, and I'd have all my friends from the neighborhood sitting on the picnic benches back there. And the funny thing is that I'd get very frustrated that I knew I had a bunch of neighbors who were Catholic, but they seemed confused with some of the stuff I was doing. And I couldn't understand that because at that point, when you're 6 or 7 years old, you don't realize that not everyone in the world who's Catholic is Byzantine Catholic. Kind of like the way most Latin rites don't realize that there's people who aren't Latin right. But in their case, at least they're 98% right. I was only 2% right. But so that used to be frustrating to me that they didn't know when to stand, when to kneel, and all that kind of stuff because it was a little bit different. But
Right.
um, but once I mean that lasted till the age of 8 or 9 or so like that I was thinking about it, and I just thought it was cool. I guess because when I was on altar serve and everything, and I just thought, and then like if the bishop was in town and I was an altar server and I got to hold his mitre or his staff, I thought I was like king of the world. I thought that was the greatest thing ever, especially as you know, if you've seen a Byzantine bishop, the outfit's a little more posh than it is with the LCs. So I mean, this looked like a really hip, cool job. And but no, I past that I
I'm sure
never
that's
considered.
exactly how the Byzantine Catholic bishops describe themselves too. This is a very hip, cool
It's
job.
it really is. It's hip and posh, but
The pay's not that great, but it's hip
no,
and it's
but
cool.
and look at the outfit, man. Look at the outfit. So,
I've
but
got these sweet threads.
well, because as an altar server, we had the Dalmatica, which looked very similar to what a Byzantine deacon wears. So it was a sharp outfit as well. I mean, all the gold thread and everything like that. It's really good stuff. So it was appealing fashion wise uh, to a young guy, but I realized even before turning to be a teen or something like that I wasn't really being called to be a priest. But the thing of it is that we all do have a vocation, and I don't like when people say, oh, well, being married and having a job is a vocation. Yeah, it is. But I mean, we all have a vocation as far as our spiritual life is concerned and as far as our church life is concerned. Like, look at how active you are with you've been spending how many weeks in a row now replacing kneelers in your church. You've got your men's
The
club. You were
kneelers and
talking
the pews.
yesterday.
It's a lot of weeks.
It's a lot of weeks. You were talking yesterday about how you were putting together your schedule for your men's group and for the entire next coming year. I mean, you've got this podcast. I know you do a bunch of other stuff like that. You know, and obviously we don't need to rattle off the junk that I get involved with. And so every single one of us is called to serve our Lord through the church, and that's a very important vocation. And I think we need to The problem is a lot of us need to take it more seriously. A lot of us think that our call is just to show up on Sundays and holy days for mass. And I don't think that's the case for anyone. I think that everyone is called to serve in some way, even if it's just simply serving on a committee that meets 4 times a year or something like that.
Yeah.
But there's something else that you should be giving back to the church. So yeah, I think it's something that people need to pray about. What is Christ calling me to do within my church community? Because I think that's one thing that's very lacking in the Catholic Church. Like I said, a lot of people think their obligation is to show up on Sundays and holy days, and that's it. The rest of the time is theirs. But I really don't think that's really the case for anyone.
Yeah, because I've been considering the Knights of Columbus, right? Because we have Blessed McGivney Hall, which is our church library, which is where the KOC meets, obviously, because of McGivney is should be a giveaway for that. But I see that, and then I'm like, But then there's also I have a friend of mine who is in the Knights of the Sepulchre of Jerusalem.
Oh, nice.
And they do a lot of the same kinds of works as well.
Yeah.
So I get torn between KOC or an actual chivalric order. That's because the KOC, I mean, it's like you just show up and all right, I'm in, you pay the dues, and you know what, at the end of the year, you've made it to 4th degree. Cool. I like that. But something about it doesn't feel, and this may just be me, official enough, if that makes any sense. And I say, for those who are not watching this on video, I'm putting up in quotes. It doesn't feel official enough, because here's the thing: a lot of the things that the KOC is already that the KOC does, which I know they just had their big convention in Canada. I think it's still going on right now. They do a lot. Like when you need the tent set up for outdoor mass, you call the KOC, they're there. When people need funds, for whatever ministries, they're there. When they need volunteers, they're there. It's all of the same things that my men's ministry is doing now. We're just not Knights of Columbus.
Yeah. But I think, what the thing is with that is that that's another part of your discernment as to what you're going to get involved with, because a group like the KOC, and man, I've got probably 10 plus friends that are members of the Knights, and they do a lot of phenomenal stuff. That the thing with the Knights and other organizations like that, you're focused more on corporal works of mercy as opposed to spiritual works. And so you've got to decide. So what are you being drawn more towards corporal or spiritual, or a combination thereof, And so like a lot of the guys I know that are Knights are also in some other groups that I'm in that are more prayer based and things like that. So they've got it covered on both ends. But some folks, I know some guys who are wonderful, awesome Catholics who are just, hey, I'm a Knight, and that's it. My father was a Knight, and I'll tell you what, they'll always have a special place in my heart for the Knights, because at my father's funeral, for the Prastas, which is the you would call it the viewing the night before, and the service that takes place, and for the funeral itself, my father's casket was guarded for hour upon hour by the Knights in their full regalia, and with their swords drawn, and I mean, it was a special thing for me and my family to see that level of respect, that that one of their brothers had fallen, and so they were going to be there to guard him and protect him until he was placed in the ground. And so there are certain aspects of the Knights which I think are great, and I hope they never get rid of. And that's, like I said, those are sites that are like burned into my memory there to see that. So
yeah,
but I mean, but they all have their positives. They all have, like, every organization you get into, any church-based organization, faith-based organization, I should say, there's some really positive aspects, and you've just got to kind of decide, which way you lean in. Do you want to be a knight where you're just basically hands on? You're collecting groceries for the poor. You're putting up tents for outdoor activities for the church, like that, or do you want to be in a group that's going to be meeting every Saturday morning to pray the rosary for particular intentions, or something in between, And so there's a lot to think about, but hey, there's nothing wrong with being in multiple organizations either.
I am leaning more towards the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. I am leaning more towards that. Now, it's obviously invite only, but I have a friend that I could speak to and go from there, because he's a member, could invite me. Obviously, I've got a year of formation, and then there's the final decision making, all of that. I don't get a sword like in the KOC, but that's not I'm not doing anything because I get a sword or not.
I would,
Of course, I can go buy a sword. All right, I'm actually surprised you don't have some sword in your basement.
I do.
Oh, see, there we go.
It'll be up here eventually.
Awesome. Well, speaking of which, let's see what you brought today, man.
What a segue. There you go. Well, this is kind of a cool item that I brought, because sometimes, and I've mentioned this before, there are times, I mentioned a few days ago, that there's all these various orders within the church that I had never heard of, but then I run across some memorabilia from them. And so then I go and I research and I learn about that order. We were talking about the Purgatorial Order. There was one a couple of days ago I brought up. I don't even remember what it was at this point, but so
the Guild of Adoration.
Oh, there you go. The Nocturnal Adoration. Right. Forgot which one I had done. Well, so it's an interesting story. I have this beautiful, beautiful statue of Our Lady, and this is, you can see it's sizable, and this is Maria Rosa Mystica. So it's Our Lady of the Roses, and she, although the title has been around for a very long time, it became very popular. And there was renewed interest back. There was a woman she was an Italian nurse who had multiple visits by Our Lady from 1947 to 1966. And based on these apparitions that she had, there was actually a shrine dedicated to Maria Rosa Mystica in December of 2019 in the Diocese of Brescia, and there's a number of chapels that possess this particular version of Our Lady. And it's interesting. There was a chapel of a school in Venezuela where there was a sister who was praying in front of Our Lady of the Roses, and she and the statue and the entire chapel were covered in glitter. Now, it's very interesting because there were studies done and tests done on that glitter that fell on the sister on a statue, and they found that it was a different composition, different chemical makeup than any glitter that was commercially available in Venezuela at the time. So you notice that there's 3 roses: a yellow, a red, and a gold. And Our Lady, talking to this nun who had these apparitions from 1947, 1966, said she was very concerned about priests and the state of the priesthood. And she said that she wanted everyone in front of the statue to pray for priests. And the roses all had different significance. So the yellow rose was a prayer for the perseverance of religious vocations, which is interesting. We were just talking about vocations. Always works out with us when I bring something up.
That's wild. Because I didn't even. Yeah. Okay.
Right. I mean, we don't discuss this, right? We never discussed it beforehand. The red rose is prayer and sacrifice and penance for offenses committed by priests and religious. Very interesting. And finally, the gold rose is prayers of penance for the Judas priests, traitors to the cause of Christ. So I find this very fascinating. But there's another really cool story that goes along with this particular statue, which I've only had for about a year and a half now. So one day I go outside and I notice Our Lady sitting in the street on alongside the curb at a house across the street from me. But her hands were missing, her nose was missing, she was battered and bruised, her paint was all faded and everything. And so I said, "Well, Our Lady's trash. I don't care what condition she's in." So I went over and I picked her up and I picked up whatever pieces I could find. I put her all back together. I fabricated any pieces that were still missing. She got a nice fresh coat of paint from me, fully restored, and I've had her. But what happened was, I thought, well, maybe the people across the street, it's an old couple, maybe they threw her out because she was damaged, and they didn't know what to do. So I went over there and I said to the woman who lives there, I said, I just want to tell you, I found the statue of Our Lady that you put out, and I restored it. So if you'd like to have her back, you may. And the woman said, well, no, she's not Catholic. She doesn't really have any affinity for Our Lady. And they had it in the garage. It fell over. It got busted. And she thought, well, this is a good time to throw it out. So no, you're welcome to keep it. So that was fine. But then there was a backstory to it. And she said, the only reason I have it is because I have a friend who was a nurse. And when St. Francis Hospital, which is in Trenton, closed down about a year or so earlier, the woman gave it, her nurse friend gave it to her as a gift. She didn't want to say no because she didn't want to make a big fuss out of it. She thought it was nice that the woman was giving her a gift. So she just accepted it and then put it in the garage after the woman left. The interesting part about all that is that St. Francis, of course, is a Catholic hospital. Unfortunately, it's closed now, but it had been there for probably about 100 years or so. And in fact, so this had been in the chapel of that Catholic hospital, and it's the hospital that I was born in. So this Maria Rosa Mystica was in the chapel of the hospital that I was born in, and then somehow 60 years later it becomes reunited with me. So I think that's a kind of a cool story, and maybe Our Lady meant for me to have this statue.
Well, you got to ask, man. It's like in the Catholic Church, we don't believe in coincidence. There's no such thing. We call it providence, right?
Yeah.
And I believe I've brought it out before, but I have here a broken St. Christopher medal. Oh. And it's one of those that you can kind of see through. Now, the problem is that St. Christopher has fallen out of it, right? Yep. But I could still probably just break out the soldering iron and get him set back where he's supposed to sit, because there's still the demarcations on it where you can see where it was. Right? Yeah. Now, I found it in my driveway. I've lived in this house for going on 11 years now. I found it the year I decided to join the Catholic Church in my driveway. And it was so weird because it hasn't been owned by anyone at my house. And I'm sitting there in the driveway on my patio. And I think, I don't know, I might have been like mixing chicken feed or something. Right. And I just turned around to walk back in the house, and I stood next to my car and I looked down, and it was right beside my foot. I was like, what is this? Pick it up. It's a St. Christopher medal. Well, that's weird. Just right there next to my foot.
Yeah.
Now, I know people go, well, did you choose St. Christopher as your confirmation saint? I did not. But you would think I would have, right? Now, obviously, this is just my opinion. But when I found it, I took it to my priest. I told him how I ended up finding it. Obviously, somebody owned a St. Christopher medal who lived in this house before I did. Somebody did, obviously. Or it could have been a worker going through and fell off, because we have tree service guys come through, or guys doing the utility poles, cable company, landscaper, right? Could have belonged to anybody, and it could have fallen in. But I found it the year that I was decided to join the Catholic Church, and talked to my priest, and he goes, well, I'll bless it. I said, okay, cool. Blessed it. the day after I began RCIA, and I went through the little paperwork about, okay, have you got anything in mind for a confirmation saint and all this other, just writing it down so that, it would all be on record for when we receive the sacraments. Sitting there, and I left it blank. And then I saw this book, actually, still on my desk. Oh,
Ah, nice.
I saw that. I picked it up. I read through it and grabbed my paper again. And I wrote down St. Michael, came home, went to bed, woke up the next morning, and the St. Christopher medal was broken.
Oh boy.
So I'm thinking he got mad at me. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know if that's the case or not, but it was really weird. It was like, hey, here's a hint, right? But the story of St. Christopher is cool. Now, obviously, it's still debated, and he's still canonized and venerated in the Catholic Church, but it's debated on whether or not he was an actual real person, right? Or if it's just a story. But the legend goes he was an evil, mean bandit robber who was a pagan, and he made money on the side after he got tired of robbing people. He made money on the side by helping people cross this river. And because he was super jacked, so he would pick them up on his arm and he would carry them across. And then at one point, it was the Christ child that appeared to him. And no matter how jacked he was like, whoa, this is taking a lot. And he finally managed to carry the Christ child across the river. And that was when he's like, oh, guess I'm converting now. And that's pretty much the story of St. Christopher in a nutshell, right? And he's the patron saint of travelers. Well, I'm not much of a traveler, but I have felt that constantly, that I've constantly felt like my life in becoming Catholic has been a spiritual battle. And I'm a former soldier, patron saint of soldiers. And okay, I got you. St. Michael, you're me, buddy. You're my patron, right? But I don't think it's a coincidence that I found it. And maybe it signified a step in my journey as a traveler into the Catholic Church. I don't know. I'm never getting rid of it. One, it's blessed. I'll try to repair it if I can with some solder, or maybe take it to a silversmith, because it's actually silver. And it's very old, because you don't see metals made like that anymore.
Yeah.
They're usually like this St. Benedict metal that I've got on my rosary here. They're usually solid. They're not see-through. They're engraved, right? Cut into. This is definitely not. So obviously fairly old. And I'm like, you know what? I'm definitely keeping it. But I'm like you, there's really weird coincidences that the lay people would call it. But I don't think it's coincidence at all that you happen to find a discarded statue of Our Lady of Roses right outside your house, and it turned out to be in the lobby area of the
it was in the chapel
you were born in.
It was in the chapel hospital
of the hospital you were born in.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
That's wild. Yeah,
God's a show off.
Look what I can do.
Yeah, probably. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in them much less after becoming Catholic. I'll tell you that, because some of it's like, okay, absolutely. Yeah, all right, I see what you're doing there, God.
Oh yeah. He's got a sense of humor.
Hey, he's got a great sense of humor. You want to really make him laugh, tell him what you've got planned, right?
True. Very
I'll tell you what, the only thing left in this plan is 35 seconds of airtime.
Yikes.
So I guess we go ahead and tell everybody thanks for watching, thanks for listening, absolutely. Thanks for subscribing, and thanks for sharing it with all their anti-Catholic friends.
Yep. And God bless you, everyone, as always.
All right. We'll see you tomorrow.